exorcism case is only fitting. But I do want to give a content warning. This is a real person, so if you are going to be discussing this in the comments, please remain respectful. This is a real person that this happened to, and this is a true story, and it involves a lot of spiritual discussions and abuse. So, you have your warning. And with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my computer and we'll get started. Today, we will be talking about the exorcism of Joan Vollmer. Our case takes place in Australia in a small town called Antwerp, which is about 350 kilometers west of Melbourne. In the late 1900s, pig farmers Ralph and Joan Vollmer lived in a house in a corner of this small town. They had no children, and this town was a tight-knit community that was founded in the mid-1800s. It was known for its eucalyptus production in the 1880s and was known as a very religious community, as two missionaries helped to grow the city soon after it was first established. Ralph was a 53-year-old German migrant and involved in his local church. His wife Joan was 49. They had moved to Antwerp in 1987 to be involved in the Salvation Army group. Joan was not religious, but Ralph required her to attend a church. He was very invested in charismatic Christianity, which, if you do not know what this is, it is Christians that are very invested in the hands-on aspect of miracles. So an example would be speaking in tongues, and this is when you're in church and they believe that the Spirit of God can physically fill you and cause you to speak in tongues or a language that is not earthly. It is only a language that God can understand. So that is charismatic Christianity. They just believe in the earthly miracle side of Christianity. So, starting in 1993, Ralph decided that Joan needed to be saved. She had been struggling with her mental health since 1990, but Ralph believed that this stemmed from the suicide of Joan's first husband. She had also allegedly been SA'd as a child. By September, Joan was involuntarily admitted to a mental hospital and was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression. She was in this facility for about 3 weeks, and during this time she was given medication. However, immediately after her release, she stopped taking her medication and her condition worsened. She would run through the field naked and dancing, and was often caught talking to herself. Ralph said that he would hear her making big noises and barking like a dog. Neighbors began to question what was happening. Ralph did not believe in schizophrenia or mental illness. He said that Joan's condition was the work of the devil. He believed that she was possessed by evil spirits. First, he tied her to the bed for long periods of time, but she would always escape. so he locked her in the basement of the farmhouse. But she was so loud and caused such a commotion that he released her because he could not sleep. He asked his neighbor and friend to come over to help. This friend, John, came over along with his wife, Leanne, to check things out. They both agreed that she was possessed by at least 10 different spirits. They thought there was one spirit who hated listening to the Bible and another spirit that they described as playful. The rest were, quote, hidden, end quote. They tied her to the bed and yelled right in her face over her terrified body. The group called the leader of their church, Leah. Leah was known to diagnose plenty of things as possession, including people who were struggling with grief. She said that Joan was possessed and that the spirits needed to be dealt with immediately. Ralph read more Bible passages to Joan, and when this did not work, Leah came over. They made sure Joan stayed tied down, and she was denied food and water, as it was said that food and water might nourish the evil spirits inside of her. They continued to pray. Hours turned into days, and Joan started to scream and cry because of her hunger and thirst. She was not allowed to shower, go to the bathroom, eat, drink, or even get up to move. However, her emotional behavior was blamed on the evil spirits. Joan began to scream at the group to let her go and that she was going to die. Leah and Ralph were sure that this was only the evil inside of her causing her to be this aggressive. Ralph then called a man named David who also attended their church. He thought that things were getting out of hand and that he needed the support of someone else. Unfortunately, even after David arrived, the torture continued. They began to not let her sleep, and she was still being denied food and water. Every time Joan would drift to sleep, they would slap her and scream in her face. She would sob and shake and beg them to stop, but this behavior was once again always blamed on the evil spirits. Ralph claimed that this was not his wife that they were hurting, but rather that they were helping her by ridding her of her evil. Ralph eventually called a friend named Matthew Nuske, who worked at a local golf course. Matthew's mother had requested that he join, as it would be his first exorcism experience. Matthew sent the group to drive to town to get olive oil and plastic wrap. He instructed the group to cover themselves in olive oil while he walked around the house and covered up the doors and windows with the wrap. He said the oil would keep the demons from entering them, and that the wrap would keep the spirits out of the house. He then gathered every single one of Joan's belongings, including her garden and veggies and jewelry, everything of hers, and ordered that they all be smashed with a sledgehammer. In the early hours of the 30th of January, this continued. He screamed in Joan's face Princess Joan and baby Princess Joan. Matthew said that they needed to beat the demons out of Joan, so they tied her to a chair in front of the fireplace. Her feet were tied to wooden stocks and she was whipped. She fought back, but because of this, she was kicked, punched, and slammed into cabinets. Matthew spat on her and held her eyelids open for long periods of time so that she could, quote, see the work that God was doing, end quote. Joan continued to fight for her life. She switched between silence, sobbing, begging, and anger. At one point, Matthew forced Ralph to leave the room so he would not see the severity of the beatings. Eventually, Matthew claimed that all of the demons, aside from Princess Joan and baby Princess Joan, had died and been removed. He said that the remaining two were stuck in Joan's stomach. So, Joan was held down while Leanne sat on her stomach and bounced up and down. They then said the demons fled to her chest area, so they lacerated and beat her breasts. Matthew squeezed Joan's neck with all of his strength to force them up and out of her throat and mouth. Whenever she would close her eyes in pain, he would poke them so that she would keep them open to watch the demons leave her body. During all of this, Ralph and David continued to stand by and yell Bible verses at her throughout this torture. 2 hours later, Matthew said that the two spirits were hanging on to Joan's tongue. So in response, David and Ralph held her down while Matthew kept pressure on her throat while he dislocated her jaw to hold her mouth open, and this lasted for close to an hour. Matthew claimed that after about an hour of this, suddenly her gurgling and tears stopped and she released a loud, sharp breath. After this, Matthew said that she was healed, but the others noticed that Joan was no longer breathing and she did not have a pulse. They unsuccessfully administered CPR, and they did not call an ambulance, claiming that the Lord was promising them that she would wake up. Matthew told them that everything would be fine and she would wake up as long as they continued to pray, and then he left the home. The remaining people in the group prayed over Joan's body for 2 days. Leah, the leader of their church that they had called in the beginning for advice, was called once again. She visited the body and placed her hands on the decomposing body of Joan and commanded for Joan to rise and walk, but this did not work. Another local Baptist minister named Mr. Atsey was called to help. He arrived to the group eating lunch inside the kitchen of the home. While at the same time as he saw this, he could see Joan's decaying body lying in the bedroom. Fluids were leaking from her body and she was swollen, and flies were everywhere. He immediately called a doctor, and this doctor, after arriving, immediately called the police. When the police arrived, Ralph told them all that they were so lucky to be there because they all were going to get to witness an amazing resurrection. The police took statements and did interviews that night. Ralph said to give him 3 days for his wife to come back to life, and 3 days later happened to be Joan's funeral. Ralph brought new fresh clothes to the funeral, saying that when Joan came back to life, she would have a new body and would want these clean clothes. News reporters attended the funeral to keep an eye on Ralph, and the first time he cried was when he was watching dirt be placed over Joan's coffin as she was being lowered into the ground. He told reporters that she had loved heaven so much that she did not want to return to earth. After the police received an autopsy report in April, Ralph, Matthew, Leanna, and David were arrested and charged with manslaughter. The pressure on Joan's throat had triggered a heart attack and was labeled as her cause of death. Leanna and David wrote to the minister at sea seeking absolution. They expressed regret and said that it was just a mistake and that they had acted against the will of God, but they were denied. After a 4-day hearing in September of 1993, the charges were thrown out. The magistrate found that the evidence was insufficient to proceed to trial for any of these people. In February of 1994, however, Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Bonjano, overturned the magistrate's decision and ordered that all 4 people stand trial, and a difficult 7-week trial began. This town, as I mentioned, was very religious, mostly Christian, and so the jury was mostly Christian, and this made for a very controversial week. The group argued that they were only doing the duty of God by resurrecting or attempting to resurrect Joan and saying that the exorcism in the first place was for her own good. The judge stated that this was not true and that they surpassed the Bible and did things based on their own beliefs and methods. In the end, Leanna spent 4 months in jail and David spent 3 months in jail, as they were said to have directly caused Joan's death because they were the ones applying force to her neck. Ralph was found guilty of recklessly causing injury and false imprisonment, and Matthew was also convicted of false imprisonment. However, Ralph and Matthew walked free and did not spend any time in jail. Ralph, shortly after being released from jail, moved to Queensland with his 3rd wife. He blames the mental hospital he took her to for the incident, saying that they were at fault because they failed to help her and heal her. The house that this incident occurred in remains empty and is now a popular spot for thrill-seeking teenagers. And that is the case. I found it to be very intriguing, very disturbing. This case, I believe, was requested by a subscriber a while ago, so thank you so much for your suggestion. I thought it was the perfect time to cover it. Very disturbing, and I am very passionate about these types of cases because I was raised in a private Christian school, and a lot of the leadership there was very beliefs onto other people, and oftentimes they are very extreme. In this case, to me, what I struggled with is the fact that so many people were involved. 4 people took part in the exorcism, and a couple other people were witnesses and called in. Yet, did all of them really believe that this was best for Joan? Do you all think that this was completely fueled by religious reasons for Joan's own good, or do you all think that any of the people in this group had some sort of ulterior motive or got some kind of sick pleasure from this? I'll be honest, when I first read about this, my first thought was spiritual psychosis. And I will read the definition because I don't want to get it wrong, but I learned about it in school once upon a time. And after reading this case, that is what came to mind. My computer is not wanting to work. Let me open a different browser, maybe. But yeah, I thought very strongly about spiritual psychosis upon finding this case. Okay. Let's see what it says. Spiritual psychosis is a mental health condition that occurs when someone's spiritual experiences become so intense that they cannot distinguish between reality and their spiritual perceptions. I'm going to read that again. Spiritual psychosis is a mental health condition that occurs when someone's spiritual experiences become so intense that they cannot distinguish between reality and their spiritual perceptions. Does that not sound a lot like what we just read? So, I'm not sure if this was the case for all of them,